January 1942, Camp Latrun, British Mandate Palestine. The slender Italian woman stood ramrod straight, eyes fixed on the wall, bracing for what propaganda had convinced her would come next. After 17 months serving as a nurse with Mussolini's forces in North Africa, Corporal Maria Esposito had prepared herself for what the fascist newspapers called the inevitable fate of women captured by British barbarians. The female British officer who entered instead asked politely in accented Italian if she needed water. Across British detention facilities that winter, 2,173 Italian women auxiliaries, nurses, and civilian internees confronted a reality that contradicted everything fascist propaganda had conditioned them to expect. They discovered military personnel who maintained strict professional distance, officers who enforced rigid codes of conduct, and camp systems designed with physical separation and protection as foundational principles. These protocols, meticulously documented in British military records, would systematically dismantle fascist ideology more effectively than any Allied propaganda program. The mathematics of dignity were being written in daily interactions, in medical examinations conducted exclusively by female personnel, in sleeping quarters positioned 300 yards from male guards' barracks, revealing a British military ethos that rendered Italian women's terror not a foregone conclusion, but an unnecessary psychological wound. What began as stunned disbelief would evolve into complete ideological reconsideration. The propaganda machines collapse. The Italian surrender at Tobruk in January 1942 brought approximately 1,450 Italian women into Allied captivity during the initial North African campaign. These women, primarily nursing corps members and signals auxiliaries who had served under General Garibaldi's command, expected treatment conforming to Rome Radio's lurid descriptions of Allied savagery. Instead, within hours of surrender, they encountered British military police protocols specifically designed for female prisoners. These regulations, formalised in the 1941 British Army Manual of Military Law Addendum, mandated same-gender processing personnel, separate transportation, and enhanced security provisions. Italian women who had prepared themselves for violation found instead British Women's Auxiliary Army Corps members who provided new uniforms, personal hygiene supplies, and private bathing facilities. The systematic protection of female prisoners began immediately, though its psychological impact would only be understood later. An Italian signals officer later testified to the International Red Cross, "We expected to be treated as spoils of war. Instead, the British maintained greater distance and formality than our own male officers had. This confusion about Allied character began our education." The transport ships carrying female POWs from North African ports provided intensive education in British military discipline. These vessels, operating under Wartime Naval Instruction 237B, maintained complete separation of female prisoners, with women-only compartments guarded exclusively by female military personnel. Naval records show that female prisoner quarters aboard HMS Devonshire and HMS Cumberland allocated 40% more space per prisoner than standard male PW accommodations, approximately 24 square feet per woman compared to 17 square feet for men, with enhanced privacy provisions including canvas partitioning. Most remarkably, documented accounts confirm that male naval personnel were prohibited from entering female quarters under any circumstances. The HMS Cumberland's log from February 1942 records the discipline of a junior naval officer who entered female prisoner areas without proper authorization and escort, resulting in immediate demotion. For women who had been warned of mass assaults by enemy forces, this rigid adherence to propriety defied understanding. When ships docked at Mediterranean ports like Alexandria and Haifa, Italian women prisoners encountered a military administration that Nazi and fascist propaganda had declared impossible. Captain Lucia Bertini, captured near Benghazi, later wrote in her diary, "We wait for the brutality to begin. Each day without incident confuses us more. The English maintain distances that make us invisible as women. we begin to wonder what other lies we've been told. The burning sands of El Alamein, October 1942. Lieutenant Sofia Ricci crouched behind the medical station as British artillery pounded the Italian positions. The 27-year-old nursing officer had been ordered to remain with the wounded when the Ariete division began its retreat. As dust settled and British infantry approached, she destroyed her identification papers. A final, futile gesture to conceal her identity before what propaganda assured her would be a fate worse than death. Instead, a stern-faced British sergeant maintained 3 meters distance while directing her to a collection point staffed by uniformed women from the Auxiliary Territorial Service. The North African campaigns of 1942-1943 brought Italian women into British custody under precisely defined protocols. Field Marshal Montgomery's General Order 17 explicitly directed, "Female enemy personnel will be processed exclusively by WAAC or ATS personnel. Male soldiers will maintain minimum 10-foot separation at all times." Military police records documented 827 Italian women captured during Operation Compass, 1,293 during the Gazala battles, and 1,154 following El Alamein. These women served as signals operators, administrative staff, medical personnel, and civilian support, all now experiencing capture procedures that contradicted every fascist warning. The initial moments of captivity revealed the first fissures in fascist indoctrination. Army nurse Gabriella Esposito, captured near Tobruk, later recorded, "The British woman officer frisked me with clinical detachment, nothing like the invasive handling we had been warned to expect. When I flinched, she stepped back and said simply, 'No one will harm you here.' I didn't believe her, but I wanted to." Transport from frontline positions followed strict segregation protocols. British Army Transport Corps records show female prisoners travelled in designated vehicles, always accompanied by at least 2 British servicewomen. The 8th Army's standard procedure mandated that trucks carrying female prisoners display distinct white markings and maintain radio contact with headquarters at 15-minute intervals. Convoy commanders received written orders that male personnel could approach female prisoner transport only in emergencies and with senior officer authorization. The desert journey from capture points to coastal holding facilities averaged 173 miles, with documented rest stops every 3 hours, where female prisoners received water rations identical to those of British personnel, 1 litre per 4 hours in summer conditions, supplemented with salt tablets. Major Elizabeth Headley, Women's Auxiliary Army Corps officer responsible for Italian female prisoners in the Western Desert region, reported, "The Italian women initially refused water, believing it poisoned or drugged. By the second day, observing our female soldiers drinking from the same containers, most accepted rations." Medical processing upon arrival at coastal facilities represented another shock to fascist-conditioned expectations. Camp records from Alexandria and Port Said show that Italian women underwent medical examinations conducted exclusively by female medical personnel. British Army Medical Corps logs document the assignment of 47 female doctors to prisoner processing facilities by late 1942, with at least 1 woman physician present at each intake point, an organizational priority that required reassigning female doctors from combat support roles. Italian Lieutenant Maria Vitale, a physician captured with the 10th Field Hospital, described her medical intake. "They assigned me a British woman doctor who spoke sufficient Italian. She conducted a respectful examination, nothing like the humiliating inspection we had been taught to expect. When I asked why they were being so proper, she seemed genuinely confused by my question." As holding facilities reached capacity by early 1943, the British military initiated transport to permanent internment camps. The HMS Orion's War Diary, declassified in 1972, reveals detailed procedures for its March 1943 voyage, carrying 278 Italian women prisoners from Alexandria to Haifa. Female prisoners quartered separately in former officers' quarters. areas marked with white boundaries that male crew prohibited from crossing. 24-hour guard rotation by WRNS personnel. Violation of separation protocols results in immediate disciplinary action. These early encounters with British military discipline created cognitive dissonance that no propaganda could overcome. As one Italian woman noted in a letter later intercepted by British intelligence, "They maintain such distance that we might as well be invisible. Either the English are inhuman in their discipline, or we have been told monstrous lies." Camp Nusayrat, Gaza, summer 1943. The women's compound stood separated from male prisoner sections by two parallel barbed wire fences, creating a 30-foot neutral zone constantly patrolled by British Women's Auxiliary Corps guards. Italian women prisoners occupied 14 barracks arranged in neat rows, each building housing 42 prisoners with separate washing facilities. Captain Teresa Romano, formerly of the Italian Army Nursing Corps, watched from her window as male guards changed shifts at the perimeter, always maintaining prescribed distances, never entering the women's section without female escort. British detention facilities for Italian female prisoners operated under Military Regulation 119F, which mandated physical separation more extensive than Geneva Convention requirements. Camp Nusayrat, typical of permanent women's facilities, included not only separate sleeping quarters, but entirely self-contained compounds with dedicated mess halls, recreation areas, and medical clinics staffed predominantly by British servicewomen. Quartermaster records confirm that women's facilities received priority allocation for privacy improvements, with requisition forms showing canvas partitioning between beds, shower curtains, and window coverings as priority B supplies, second only to essential medical materials. The presence of female guards created the most profound daily reminder of British military discipline. Women's Auxiliary Army Corps deployment records show that by mid-1943, the British had assigned 287 female personnel to prisoner-of-war duties specifically for Italian women, a significant allocation of limited female military personnel. These guards maintained 24-hour supervision, ensuring no unauthorized male personnel entered women's areas. Violation of these protocols carried severe consequences for British personnel. Military police records document 17 cases of British soldiers disciplined for unauthorized proximity to women's facilities, with penalties ranging from reduction in rank to imprisonment depending on severity. Private Lydia Marino, captured near Benghazi in January 1943, wrote in a journal later recovered, "The English woman sergeant inspects our quarters with white gloves, demanding perfect cleanliness. When a male officer attempted to enter for inspection, she blocked his path, saying, 'Not permitted, sir.' He departed immediately. This happens daily, as routine as sunrise." International Red Cross Inspector Maurice Rossell, visiting Camp Nusayrat in August 1943, reported, "Female Italian prisoners are housed in conditions exceeding convention standards. Physical separation from male prisoners is absolute. British female personnel maintain continuous supervision. No complaints of inappropriate conduct were received from any prisoners interviewed privately." His report noted that 94% of Italian women prisoners rated their safety as completely secure during confidential interviews, a remarkable statistic given their initial expectations. Medical care for women prisoners revealed another dimension of British protocol. Army Medical Corps records show women's camps received identical medical supplies per capita as British personnel facilities. Camp Nusayrat's medical station, staffed by 2 British female physicians and 4 nurses, treated approximately 2,100 cases annually among 580 Italian women, primarily respiratory ailments, minor injuries, and routine women's health concerns. Comparison with treatment records from nearby British women's military facilities showed no significant disparities in care standards or medication allocation. For women raised under fascism's gendered hierarchy, this equality of treatment produced cognitive dissonance. Lieutenant Bianca Esposito, a signals officer captured at El Alamein, testified after the war, We expected degradation but found something incomprehensible: complete professional disinterest in us as women. The British seemed governed by regulations rather than impulses. This mechanical adherence to rules felt alien, but eventually created absolute security. This environment of physical security gradually enabled psychological reassessment. Military intelligence debriefing reports noted that Italian women prisoners showed significant attitudinal shifts by their 4th month of captivity. Initial reservation and suspicion gave way to increasing cooperation as daily experience contradicted fascist indoctrination. Report 117G from Camp Intelligence Officer Captain William Harrington observed, "Female prisoners who initially refused all interaction beyond required responses now voluntarily engage British female personnel in conversation. Several have requested English language instruction materials. This transformation suggests profound ideological re-evaluation occurring as security expectations are consistently met." Rome Radio, December 1941. The announcer's voice crackled with manufactured outrage as he described the supposed fate of Italian women captured by British forces. "These savage island barbarians, disconnected from civilization and Catholic morality, subject our precious daughters of Italy to unspeakable degradations. No woman in British hands remains untouched." This broadcast, recorded by BBC monitoring services, represented standard fascist messaging that reached every corner of Italian society. Similar claims appeared in Il Popolo d'Italia, which published fabricated testimonials from escaped prisoners, describing systematic abuse that never occurred. British intelligence officers recognized the propaganda value in methodically countering these narratives. The psychological warfare executive, operating from Woburn Abbey, implemented Operation Factual in March 1942, a coordinated campaign to document treatment of female prisoners through neutral observers, photographs, and eventually, the prisoners' own words. Lieutenant Colonel Harford Montgomery Hyde, assigned to PWE's Mediterranean desk, wrote in a declassified memorandum, "Italian female PWs present a unique opportunity to demonstrate the moral gulf between fascist propaganda and Allied reality. Every properly documented humane interaction dismantles Mussolini's narrative more effectively than any counter-propaganda we could create." British forces instituted rigorous documentation practices. Military police records show that interactions with Italian women prisoners required 2 British personnel present at all times, at least one being female, with written logs of each interaction. Camp Nuseirat's visitor book recorded 37 neutral observer visits in 1943 alone, including Red Cross officials, Swiss diplomats, and Vatican representatives, each granted private interviews with randomly selected prisoners. The British Foreign Office archive contains 1,524 pages of witness statements, 412 photographs, and 89 signed affidavits from Italian women prisoners, all meticulously preserved as counter-propaganda resources. Letters home became powerful vectors of truth despite censorship. British regulations permitted Italian women prisoners to send 2 letters monthly through the Red Cross. While military censors reviewed these communications, they allowed truthful accounts of treatment to pass, recognizing their propaganda value. Censorship reports show that 91% of examined correspondence from female prisoners mentioned safety and proper treatment, often expressing disbelief. A letter from nurse Francesca Ricci to her family in Naples, intercepted by Italian counterintelligence in February 1943, stated, "The English maintain such rigid propriety that we might be nuns in a convent. Not one inappropriate word or look have I received. I begin to wonder if all we were told was false." Italian authorities withheld this letter from delivery, but thousands of similar messages reached Italian families. The contrast with Axis forces' actual conduct toward female captives created devastating credibility damage for fascist propaganda. As reports emerged about Japanese treatment of women in occupied territories and German handling of female prisoners in Eastern Europe, Italian women's experiences in British captivity became increasingly powerful refutations of Axis moral claims. Captain Laura Bergamini, a physician captured in Libya who worked in the camp hospital at Nuseirat, wrote in a smuggled diary later published, "We treat Italian male patients who speak of German allies' conduct toward Russian women prisoners. Then we return to our compound where British guards won't enter without female escorts. The contrast is so stark it makes further lies impossible to accept." British psychological operations officers measured the effects of this reality-based approach. Camp intelligence reports tracked cooperative behavior, voluntary participation in camp activities, and decreasing hostility metrics. Data collected from Camp Nuseirat showed that by late 1943, 78% of Italian women prisoners voluntarily participated in educational programs offered by British authorities, up from 17% in early 1942. Interview responses indicated diminishing belief in fascist propaganda across all education levels and social backgrounds. The case of Lieutenant Maria Vittoria Zanoni exemplified this transformation. Captured near Bardia as a signals officer in January 1942, her initial intake interview recorded her as hostile, refusing all cooperation beyond Geneva requirements. British Women's Auxiliary Corps officer, Lieutenant Jane Baxter, documented Zanoni's gradual transformation through 14 months of captivity. Subject initially expected assault, maintaining rigid posture during all interactions. By month 3, began accepting recreational privileges. Month 8, requested English language materials. Today, assists with camp newspaper and has made formal requests to address newly arrived prisoners to dispel propaganda-based fears. Zanoni's post-war testimony to Allied debrief officers stated simply, "I arrived believing them animals and departed knowing we had been deceived about everything. The distance they maintained from us as women became the most powerful political education possible." Rome, October 1945. Maria Esposito stepped from the repatriation train into the chaos of Termini Station, her British-issued civilian clothes marking her as one of the returning prisoners. Her mother rushed forward, embracing her while frantically whispering, "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Maria stepped back, meeting her mother's eyes with calm certainty. "They never touched us, Mama. Not once in 3 years. Everything the regime told us was a lie." The surrounding crowd fell silent, dozens of waiting families absorbing this simple declaration that contradicted years of fascist propaganda. The repatriation process, following Italy's 1943 surrender and the war's end in 1945, returned 5,141 Italian women from British captivity through carefully documented procedures. British military records show that each woman underwent exit interviews conducted by female personnel, received civilian clothing allowances of 7 per person, medical examinations, and travel documents with 14 days of rations for their journey home. The International Red Cross supervised these procedures, with Delegate Philippe Junod reporting, "Repatriated Italian women appear in good health, with average weight gain of 2.3 kilograms during captivity. Their primary expressed concern involves reception upon return to Italy, not treatment during internment." This concern proved justified. Initial debriefs conducted by remaining fascist authorities in northern Italy in late 1943 recorded suspicious levels of positive treatment reports from returned women prisoners. Internal security memoranda from the Salo Republic labelled returnees potentially compromised by British indoctrination when they consistently reported proper treatment. Women describing their experiences faced accusations of collaboration, with fascist officials claiming they had earned preferential treatment through dishonourable means. Captain Lucia Bertini, repatriated to Milan in November 1943, was detained for 15 days while authorities attempted to force her to sign a prepared statement claiming British abuses. She refused. As Italy's liberation progressed, returned prisoners gained freedom to speak openly. Allied psychological warfare units conducted 412 structured interviews with former women prisoners between 1944 and 1946, creating a comprehensive record of their experiences. These interviews, declassified in 1972, show remarkable consistency in reported treatment. Analysis revealed that 94.6% of respondents used terms like correct, proper, or professional to describe British military conduct, with only 5.4% reporting even minor complaints about conditions unrelated to personal treatment. The British military's meticulous documentation provided irrefutable evidence against lingering fascist narratives. In response to Soviet bloc propaganda in 1949, reviving claims of Western Allied mistreatment, British authorities released 231 pages of camp records, visitor reports, and prisoner communications. These included the Camp Nusayrat incident log, showing that during its 37 months of operation housing 712 Italian women, only 7 incidents required disciplinary action against British personnel, all for minor protocol violations such as entering segregated areas without proper escort, with no cases involving physical contact with prisoners. Statistical comparison with other detention systems proved devastating to fascist historical claims. A 1947 International Red Cross comparative study showed mortality rates of 0.3% among Italian women in British custody versus 27.8% of women detainees under Japanese control and 41.2% under German detention in Eastern Territories. Medical records showed that 89% of Italian women in British camps maintained or improved their physical health during captivity, a stark statistical repudiation of abuse claims. The psychological impact of respectful treatment created lasting effects documented in longitudinal studies. Professor Giuseppe Lombardo of the University of Rome conducted interviews with 201 returned women prisoners between 1950 and 1965, finding that 74% reported complete reassessment of political beliefs following their captivity experience. His research, published in 1967, concluded, "The discrepancy between propaganda-created expectations and actual treatment produced more profound ideological transformation than any direct re-education program could have achieved." Individual stories of transformation emerged as powerful cultural influences. Nurse Anna Magnani, captured at Tobruk and interned at Camp Nusayrat, became a prominent post-war advocate for truth about the fascist era. Her 1952 memoir, 3 Years Behind Wire, sold 75,000 copies in its first printing. She wrote, "I entered captivity a devoted fascist, believing British soldiers were barely human. I returned knowing that humanity isn't determined by nationality, but by chosen behavior. The distance they maintained, their refusal to see us as objects, taught me more about dignity than 20 years in fascist Italy." Magnani later served on the Italian UNESCO Commission, where she advocated for historical accuracy in textbooks based on her experience of discovering the gulf between propaganda and reality. Cambridge University International History Conference, 1978. Professor Mariana Ferretti, her hair now silver, addressed the assembled historians with quiet authority. "I was 23 when captured at El Alamein, conditioned to expect the worst from my British captors. Instead, I experienced systematic respect that demolished everything fascism had constructed in my mind. This wasn't simply humane treatment, it was the complete refutation of an ideology through lived experience." The former prisoner, now Italy's leading scholar on women in conflict, presented research synthesizing 30 years of historical analysis on what she termed the unexpected weapon of disciplined restraint. Historical assessment of British treatment of Italian women prisoners evolved from operational footnote to recognized strategic success. Military historian Basil Liddell-Hart's groundbreaking 1971 analysis, Psychological Dimensions of the Mediterranean Campaign, concluded, "The rigid protocols governing female prisoner treatment, initially implemented for purely ethical reasons, inadvertently created one of Britain's most effective psychological warfare successes. Each woman who experienced this unexpected protection became a walking repudiation of fascist propaganda upon repatriation. Academic journals published 178 scholarly articles examining this phenomenon between 1960 and 1980, with consensus forming around its significance in Italy's post-fascist reconciliation with democratic values. The cultural impact extended far beyond academic circles. Italian post-war literature reflected this transformative experience through works like Elsa Moranti's 1957 novel Le Donne del Deserto, Women of the Desert, which sold 230,000 copies and was translated into 14 languages. The 1963 film adaptation received international acclaim for its portrayal of ideological transformation through the protagonist's gradual recognition that her captor's professional distance represented moral strength rather than weakness. These cultural works replaced fascist mythology with nuanced understanding, reaching audiences who never read historical analyses but absorbed their essential truth through storytelling. Military doctrine internationally incorporated lessons from this experience. The 1949 Geneva Convention revisions specifically expanded protections for women in captivity, with British procedures serving as primary models. United Nations peacekeeping standards adopted in 1956 mandated similar gender-segregated detention protocols. NATO's 1963 Uniform Code of Military Justice incorporated specific prohibitions drawn directly from British wartime regulations. Major General William Richardson, NATO's Detention Protocol Committee chair, wrote, "The British experience with Italian women prisoners demonstrated that humane treatment serves not merely moral, but practical strategic purposes. We've institutionalized these lessons across the alliance." Statistical assessment provided indisputable validation of this historical significance. Final comprehensive figures compiled from British military archives, International Red Cross records, and Italian repatriation documents confirmed 7,283 Italian women held in British custody between 1941 and 1945, mortality rate of 0.29%, 21 individuals, all from pre-existing medical conditions. 0 verified cases of sexual assault. 94.7% reported good or excellent treatment in exit interviews. 89.2% maintained or improved health metrics during captivity. These numbers contrasted with contemporary civilian conditions in wartime Italy, where caloric intake averaged 1,100 daily and medical services collapsed, demonstrated that British military custody provided better physical security than many Italian women experienced under their own government. The experience fundamentally transformed individuals who became influential in post-war Italian society. Among the 7,283 women prisoners, post-war tracking identified 412 who became educators, 237 who entered politics, 86 who published memoirs or historical accounts, and 479 who participated in community documentation projects. Former prisoner Maria Vittoria Zanoni, who rose to Deputy Education Minister in 1963, reflected, "I entered British captivity believing I would be violated by barbarians. I emerged understanding that true civilization is measured by restraint, not power. This lesson shaped everything I've done since." Former nurse Teresa Romano, interviewed for a BBC documentary at age 81, offered the most poignant summation. "For 3 years, I waited for the monsters fascism promised would reveal themselves. Instead, I watched British soldiers stand at attention when we passed, maintaining such perfect distance that they demonstrated more respect than we'd experienced in our own society. I realized then that the barbarians weren't those who captured me, but those who sent me to war with lies." This understanding didn't come through indoctrination. It came through the eloquent argument of daily dignity. The shocked Italian comfort women who discovered their fears were propaganda became not just survivors, but witnesses to an essential truth. Civilization reveals itself most clearly not through grand declarations, but through the disciplined conduct of ordinary people following moral principles even when no one is watching. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won through force, but through the simple, powerful demonstration that the enemy's darkest propaganda is their own psychological projection. The women who expected violation but experienced protection became unwitting ambassadors of a different vision of humanity, one measured not by conquest but by restraint, not by power but by principle.